Hey, hello.
TV.
Video. Hang on, that's me.
Oh, did you always want it to be about the person's experience, or was there a clear shift along the sort of TV special theatre route?
Well, with the TV, I had got probably into my, I don't know, somewhere in my mid-30s, and I thought, I'm not enjoying doing mind reading on the street.
Mm.
And I just couldn't really think why I was doing it. Look, when we're in our 20s and we normally get into this kind of stuff, whatever it is in our lives, we're different people. And at that point, we probably do want everyone looking at us and going, oh, you're amazing. And then things change. You grow up a bit, and in your 30s, you probably are thinking a bit more about um, the meaning of what you do, what value it has, and so those priorities in your 20s start to feel a bit silly, perhaps. So that definitely led to the change with the TV shows and the shift of the focus being on other people. And then you've got genuine drama playing out, because you've got members of the public going through these Truman Show style things that I set up. And then with the stage shows, I didn't think about it consciously until my manager, Michael, mentioned it once. He said, it's really unusual for a magician to make the show about the audience. And he was talking about, as in our shows, my shows, that, you make the show about the audience, and that's really unusual with magicians. And I hadn't thought about it like that. But when he said it, I thought, oh, I hope that is the case, because that is how I'd like to do it. And I knew I wasn't, when I started out doing magic, I certainly wasn't like that. I was very much about me. It's all you know. It's all you're ever told and
Mhm.
taught. And that's all you ever see other magicians do. But I think somehow I drifted into that sort of mode. But when he said it, like anybody, those sort of inspiring things we hear are often people just articulating something that we half have felt or had, but we never really had the language for it. So anyway, after that, I was much more aware of it as a thing. What are people going to take away from this show, and how can it feel generous and not feel like I'm just trying to take something in some weird way.
You have an extensive run, pretty hardcore run.
Mhm.
How do you find it when you're not feeling it? Because you must get tired, ill, all those things. You're traveling a lot. And when the nights when you're just a bit, ugh, how do you get yourself in the zone?
It's funny, actually. I was writing a magic book on tour, which is for magicians. And a lot of it is about this kind of stuff, and just the experience of touring and performing, and how to get all that kind of stuff right. And some of the stuff we've been talking about. I think most things are very helpful to bring on stage with you. Because again, they'll make that, if you're feeling impatient and irritable, actually bringing that on stage is quite good, because it won't make you impatient and irritable with the audience, and plus you've got your script, right? So, but it will give you a sense of urgency or a sense of something. It'll just give it a little bit of fire that night. The only thing that's, I think, tricky if you're drab, especially if you're on tour, and it's a drab day, the weather's been shit, and there's been nowhere to go for a coffee, and it's some audience, it's not the audiences, but sometimes the theaters, you can't really hear the audience. So it sounds like there's like no one there, which is really dispiriting as well. So you're having to fake a lot of, try and fake your half of the energy that flows very naturally when you can hear everybody. And that can be difficult. But because you've got a script, and because you've got the muscle memory of everything, even on those horrible nights, you can just, those words and everything will carry you. I'm not improvising. There are moments I have to, like some routines that are improvised, because by their nature, I can't be doing the same every night. But you've learned the best way of doing it, and the audience
Mhm.
should get a tell. I think I've certainly had shows where I've really not been feeling it, and the directors happen to have been in that night and they've loved it. And then other nights I've thought, oh, it's gone really well, and they've gone, oh no, you were, because I was loving it too much, and I was just starting to ad lib bits, and actually meant the show was starting to drag because it was starting to get a bit long, and it just wasn't tight. It didn't have its pace to it, and so they didn't like it as much. So hopefully you are served by a really solid, honed and polished script that's been worked on, and your muscle memory of everything. And I do find, although it's a weird thing to say, that sometimes if you're not really feeling the show and you just want to get through it, it helps because you get through it quicker. You hit everything and you're on to the next thing, and it's just like bang, 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 bang. And you're not doing the far worse thing, which is when you're just having such fun on stage that you're just starting to kind of enjoy a bit of banter with the audience. And it's death for it. It might make you feel good, but you suddenly realize, God, was the first half an hour and 20? That's terrible. It should be like an hour and 5 or whatever. It's like 15 minutes of me just, God. Then you imagine, God, imagine you put those 15 minutes together and made people sit through it, and me just living little bit. It's like all those silences that magicians and mentalists use, those kind of ominous moments, just when things are slow. Like imagine if you just took all those silences and just made people sit through I mean, it would just be interminable. So
I think there's a misconception that that's sincerity and mystery.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is, again, it's all about you. It's all about you. It shouldn't be about you. It should be about the audience.
I know you're a notorious note taker after shows. There is, of course, an infamous story that's been well documented where you took notes after the final night of a show. The show was never been done again, and yet you sat down and
an infamous story, but not actually for that was my power guy. An infamous story, but it was for, I think it was Enigma as opposed to
it was. Yeah.
I remember that, sitting with Andy after the last night, and we were still making changes.
Which is brilliant. It's, I guess, what holds you accountable to that standard? Is it, because I was going to say, well, if you're constantly taking notes, is it to keep the show alive for you? Is it because you just care about what you're delivering so much? But in this example, you were taking notes for a show that you were never going to perform again, which is a remarkable sort of standard.
We were doing it sort of half finding it funny that we were doing it. I mean, the reason for doing it throughout is that, again, it's anything to keep the show present, and knowing you're going to make a little change in something you've done 100 times, you start to rediscover a bit of that sort of, that little bit of adrenaline again. And sometimes we'll sort of disagree. I think, really, you sure? And say, no, I think it'll work, and I'll try. So, oh, that was great. That really did work. Or sometimes just the timing on a gag that hasn't really been working, and often Andrew will say, oh, we'll try it like this and put the emphasis there. And it's just love. It feels like a little bit has been, and then that bit. There's a general feeling with a stage show, like it's a big bag of wet cement. And I'm sure you find the same with your Zoom shows, like a big bag of wet cement, and then you're just getting through it, but slowly it starts to set, like bits set here and there, and that becomes solid. And by then you've just got this really solid thing. And then I guess you polish the cement as well, but it's just, the whole thing is a process of something becoming really solid and reliable. And for a long time, it isn't like that. It's just a big bag of wet cement. And then the fun of it, once it is set, is the polishing and the little sort of, little tweaking moments. It's so lovely. And sometimes you find we found a really big shift in this show really late, probably 150 shows into it. There's just stuff that was just bugging me because it wasn't quite working. And I was doing this show every night, so I was more aware of it because the directors are coming every now and then. We had a big chat about it, and I tried out some things, and suddenly it was just like clunk, this bit of the show really fell into place, and that suddenly a thing became clear that hadn't been clear. Part of the through line, just suddenly it really worked in a way that I think hadn't been clear before. And that is amazing. That's amazing. It just makes everything better and gives you something to be enjoying as a performer that's done the show a lot.
Do you get nervous?
No, I get at the start of a show, as in the start of a run, there's a lot of there's a lot of kind of like, where am I? What comes next? Sometimes I'll forget bits and start a trick that's, not now, that's the one that comes after, so I've got to pedal back and do that. So that can happen. That doesn't make me nervous, but it just makes me a little bit sort of very focused, so probably not huge fun to be around. Like I'm very kind of like this, and you want to double check. Like I'm lucky I've got people that are sorting out the props and making sure everything's in place, but I do become a little bit Is that right? Is that right? Have you done that? Have you done that? A little bit like that. So I think there's a certain amount of nerves, but I don't feel it as nerves. And the only time really I think I never feel at all nervy is if I'm on like a chat show or some sort of thing where you're waiting to come on and you're sort of standing behind a bit of, you know, plywood waiting for them to say your names. It's the standing in the wings thing, waiting to come on. I think that probably for most people is because there's nothing you can do. But no, I don't find it nervy. And actually having some nerves is helpful. And if there's anybody in or anything about that night that would just make it specific, like a friend's in or someone's in from the Olivier Awards, like they have like 20 people that come in on different nights to judge it, or there's a reviewer in, or like anything like that, I like to know, because it suddenly just stops that night from just being a nondescript night that it's just sort of, I'm just going through. It's suddenly a specific thing. Oh, Fergus is in, or so-and-so's in, or that person's in. I'll make it for them. That'd be nice. And that's all lovely. And that's not quite the same as nerves, but it is just a kind of gives you that little bit of extra something. So that's important.
Wow. Again, so much good stuff in there. I had two things sprung to mind. Do you feel that now you're so well known, something like sharing your vulnerabilities, you have a license to do that, given how established you are? For example, if you were just starting your career now, do you think you could come out on stage and maybe discuss the things you're discussing? Do you think time has changed, or do you think the fact that you're so established has allowed you that? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I don't think it's about being established, other than that also means I've been doing it for a long time, and doing it for a long time has given me, I think, a better appreciation of what works on stage and how to do it than I would at the beginning. But that's not really about being established. That's just about experience. So I think anybody could do it. Obviously, if you're young, the things you're going to be able to get away with talking about are going to be different than if you're, middle-aged or whatever, just in terms of your life.
I remember hearing an episode of Comedian, and someone said, I think they were purposefully being inflammatory, but they said you'll never have a good young comic because they just don't have that life experience or that ability to kind of, I guess, deliver things in a way that perhaps translates or is accessible.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sure there's something in that. Obviously, there's a million different types of comedy, but a real thing, you see it with magic. And I remember watching a young magician at the Magic Circle once performing, and he was probably, I don't know, 15 or something, and he was doing an act like a middle-aged corporate bland sort of magician, and it felt a real shame. It felt like, so if you're 13, I don't know what he was into. He probably wasn't into skateboarding, but if he was, then bring that to it, just whoever you are. But it's hard at that age to actually kind of see the value in what you do from that little bit of distance that you need if you're going to make an act out of it. But it's that thing of authenticity, of just being yourself on stage, is huge. It's everything. I think it doesn't matter whether you're seeing a magician or a singer or anybody. Everyone wants to connect with a human being, and I think ultimately when you're on stage, that's your ultimate job, which is why magic gets in the way. It gets in the way of all that. It makes it difficult to make you a human being for an audience, because you can also supposedly do all these other superhuman things. So those are the challenges of magic, at least in the way that I see it. So I think it is harder when you're younger to just sort of fake that kind of stuff. But if you work with somebody else and you're open to it, I think that, it could be really, really special to perform in a way that is totally authentic to you. But you also need that extra weird sort of inauthenticity that comes with the fact you're performing it, and it's like a very curated version of your life, and you're not including all the stuff that doesn't really fit, and you're creating a sort of honed version of yourself. But that's all I'm doing. That's all I'm doing now. I'm just, older, and it's stuff I've thought about a lot, and I guess I've got a sense for it. But I think in terms of just going and seeing a performer you don't know and then being vulnerable on stage is wonderful. I don't think it's about you have to know them. That's just how you're going to find out about them.
When you look back, oh, sorry.
No, I was going to say there are differences if you know you're known and you know that your audiences know you. But when I went out and did the shows in New York, I just presumed nobody there would know me, and that was still a show that had, like, you know, personal revelation and stuff in it, and it was absolutely fine. I think and I think probably again what made it work was perhaps the fact that I had a lot of shows under my belt for myself, so I felt comfortable with all of that. But I think, but certainly they didn't know me, but that didn't seem to matter. It's important stuff, though, I think, however you find it.
I remember hearing an interview with you and Richard Young from the Magicians Podcast, and you talking about, sorry, it's a very quick aside, but just a review and where you'd struggled to remove a pen lid. And they thought that was part of the act, just because you had shown that sort of human element, that human side of yourself. I thought it was a really interesting thing.
It was a total accident. I just couldn't get the lid, and it took forever. And somebody, it was in a review saying it was, I don't know if they thought I did it on purpose, but they said it was like a really human moment. And yeah, it really stayed with me. You know, failing a bit is so important. Again, if you just get everything right, it's not that interesting after a while. People just quickly start to glaze over, and it's just becomes less magical somehow. It's like if you're a juggler, you drop a ball on purpose every now and then just to remind people that what you're doing is difficult.
I remember a friend of mine saw you, and they said one of their favourite bits of the show, sorry, I'm just reverting back into your answer, but was someone had got panicked that they couldn't come out of this hypnosis. So you just rolled up your sleeves and you came off the stage and just focused on that person and spent time with them. Now, that's perhaps a counterintuitive thing to do as a performer, because you're like, oh shit, I've got to keep an eye on 1,500 people. But for them, they were just absolutely blown away, and it was like this beautiful thing. And I think,
but again, you see, that's a bit like a disaster in an audience. I mean, hopefully, that sort of thing has happened a few times. So I'm not sure exactly what it was that night, but like, if you ignored somebody who was having some sort of crisis, you've immediately lost the audience, because all they're going to be thinking about is that. If I step off the stage and clearly do something that is very different, I'm clearly doing something that doesn't happen every night. That's quite an electric thing anyway. It would be the same in any show if you saw, or if like, oh, the night we saw it, this thing happened. Like that brings everybody back very much into the present moment. There's also a thing peculiar to that sort of problem that I was sorting out there, where I'm doing the thing in real time that I'm saying I can do in the whole of the show. Like, I am actually now going and influencing a person and bringing them and, you know, changing their mental state. I'm doing all the things in an unplanned way for real with the person. So it would never occur to me that this is a problem for the show. It would only, I mean, I want to make sure this person's all right, but I also know this is fine. Putting the show on hold and doing this is only adding to the audience experience. Whereas if
I mean, the last time I saw you, sorry to interrupt, was I don't quite know what happened a few rows behind me, but I think someone had a fit potentially, and you just stopped. You were mid-sentence. Is everything okay? And again, it's funny. It just created a warmth, and it was so impressive, because then you're back into it, and it didn't feel like, oh, now he's back to his script. You know,
yeah, there's something lovely, and like the thing the other night, there was 22 minutes of just a stopped show. And, you know, I left the stage, and I wasn't just standing there awkwardly that time, but it was like just a big thing that we all went through. It's sort of amazing. And like, there was a woman who was a doctor that got up and helped this person, and it was a lovely kind of shared thing that we couldn't all jump in and help or anything, but nonetheless we were all sort of part of. And again, the woman was fine, and she got taken out, and she was looked after and everything. But getting back into the show after that, again, there's nothing awkward. I mean, it would be very weird if I've seen comedians that do TV, but they're like doing a stage bit that's unusual for them, because they normally work on TV, and they come out and something goes wrong and they go off and come back in again, because that's what you used to do. That's what you used to do on TV. Like, you just stop. But it, like, how it's really horrible for an audience to feel like, oh, they're starting their script again. That's horrible. Like, but this really felt like a lovely kind of, how do you get everybody back into it? You just sort of acknowledge what an extraordinary thing this was and how amazing this woman here got up and helped. And where was I? What was I talking about? Oh yeah, I was talking about the goldfish, wasn't I? Well, I don't even know why I was talking about that, but and obviously it just was that goldfish stuff was all my script and everything. But they were just like, oh, let's just get back. Where were we? And just kind of acknowledging that slightly confused, funny state we're all in, sort of between real life and getting back into the show, and just sort of, leaning into that. And I think it would have felt lovely. And then they're back on track when they start laughing at the gags they normally laugh at, and it's all fine again. So yeah, it's kind of a really nice thing. I like those moments. As long as everyone's all right, those moments are sort of amazing for a show.
I remember coming to see you and you said, oh, where are your tickets? And you clocked my seat. And then during the course of that show, when you stepped out, you gave me a little elbow and you were kind of just playing around, which was a joke, literally, for me and you, and there were 1,500 people in the auditorium. And I remember being really struck by, wow, that is confidence. Like, you were so on script. It was a perfect night, but you're playing around it. I mean, that's got to be so much fun.
Yeah, that is fun. I had a friend when I was doing the show I think it was in England. He was an American friend, and there were a couple of moments he just couldn't work. He was a very knowledgeable magician, but a couple of things he really couldn't work out. And there were just moments when things must have happened, but he couldn't quite work out when. So I said, I will wink at you and I will flash you a big smile when I do those things tonight. And that was really good fun, and then seeing him go, oh, just because they were just nice moments that he'd never have considered, I think. So it was like, that was lovely. Yeah, I love anything like that. But as long as it doesn't actually distract me. Where I am now doing the show, I can't really see friends when they come in, so it's a bit of a shame they're quite far back and it's a bit dark. But yeah, I do like it when I can see them.
One thing I'd also say you're known for internally is like a very happy camp. Everyone who goes,
I love all these things I'm known for. This is really nice. I didn't know I was known for these things. That's nice.
Totally, yeah. It's a very happy camp. Everyone who goes on tour with you loves it. Like more so than other theatre friends I have or people that do other shows. I guess, one, how do you pick your people? And two, how much do you think that does contribute to the overall product of Derren Brown, the stage show?
Yeah, I think tours can be fractious and tricky times. You're all in each other's pockets for months and months. This is a really long tour. Showman the whole thing is a year and 2 months, including the West End, and about 10 months of that is touring. So it's important to me for it to be with people I like. Doesn't necessarily mean they're all gonna like each other. And sometimes I bring friends and people that know about magic, because then that's always really good to keep talking about ideas as the show goes on. And they're from a different world, from the sort of more theatre stock people, and the sort of more tech side of things, people that are doing the video and the sound and so on. And they are different worlds, and sometimes those worlds can be a little bit, have to find their way around each other. But I think it's always worked well for me, and I think you just want a nice, friendly atmosphere. But that's also, that has to come. I don't really think about this, but a lot of that has to come from me, because if I was going to be nasty or in a bad mood or precious or whatever, then that is going to trickle down and affect it. So that's something that I don't just look to them for. I have to take responsibility for that myself too. But I really, really like touring, and I don't spend a huge amount of time with any of the people because I'm normally writing during the day. But in as much as we're getting together and seeing each other day after day after day, yeah, it's really important. And I can't imagine why, other than fear and insecurity, why you ever want to make it a less than completely pleasant working environment.
Why do you think it is magicians are notoriously blamey to audiences, or can have a particularly difficult way with an audience, more so than other performers, I'd say?
Because of that little bit of hostility that's always in the relationship. If you're trying to fool somebody, it's like you're just, isn't it? It's like you see it with psychics and mediums. I mean, they're just peddling a lie and they know it. And if they start to get a little bit found out, they just sue. They sue and they blame, and they're horrible. And I've come across a few of them. They're all really nice on stage. Like their personas are like, you know, the lady next door, or the sort of the lovely, charming, slightly kind of camp, butter wouldn't melt in his mouth kind of. They're not. They're just sort of horrible and rough and like litigious, and like they're never very nice. And I think that just comes with defending a lie. So there's a little bit of that in magic, I think. And also again, because you're always hiding behind something. If you're any sort of magic, most magicians have pretty terrible social skills, I think, because they haven't needed to learn that, because they've got this clever thing that they can do, and then people go, "Oh, you're amazing! Why aren't you on TV?" Or "You're fantastic! You're brilliant! You're as good as that guy." And they and I'm talking about myself here. Like all through my 20s, I totally got by on that. I always had to have tricks in my pocket, and you don't really necessarily learn that like impressing people is not really how you want to get through life, or try. Like the worst thing would be is to be around someone who's trying to impress you. Like that's not what you want. That's not what we like in people. We like people that are nice and kind, and just ordinary things like that. So I think there's a lot of that, but I just think when things start to go a bit wrong, all those feelings of insecurity get sort of really exacerbated. Then there's just that weird thing in magic. A friend of mine said, "Isn't it? It's weird that you step out on stage as a magician and you immediately become the worst version of yourself." It's like you just like, that's the aim. Like, what is the least likable version of myself? So I could make fun of what people wear. Okay, I'll do that, because if I did that in real life, that would be pretty obnoxious. And I'll just like tell people what to do and bark at them and tell it. It's like just all these terrible behaviors. Like for some reason it feels really incompatible with just being nice and warm and sort of inviting. I really try and make my shows about the audience, and I see a kind of if there's a sort of flow of energy in the room, I try and make it like it's from me out to the audience, as in like I feel like it's a giving thing rather than somebody saying, "Look at what I can do. Aren't I amazing? Yes, I did this. How could I have known that? I couldn't. Thank you." Like all that's about the lines of energy are coming in. Come on, give me more, give me more, give me more. So that's obviously like obnoxious. And we all feel it in our bones when we see performers like that. It's like, great, don't know how he did it, but there's just something a bit like, you don't love the performer. You might like the magic, but you don't love them. So I think that's probably part of it as well, because of the power relationship, because of the high status thing. Like, comics tend to be low status in terms of how they pitch themselves with the room. Magicians play high status. And the moment you are playing all that stuff, it just brings with it that slightly entitled or just a sort of slightly unpleasant relationship. I see all those things as problems to overcome, not the very things to kind of make part of the performance. I see those are the things you have to find ways of getting away from to keep what you do actually interesting.
Excluding the last 12 months, what is a particularly sort of cozy time or memory with magic? What's like a particularly fond period of time that you look back at?
I don't know, actually. I don't know if I don't know. When I was doing close-up magic years ago around restaurants, I think the coziest thing, maybe right at the start, I used to live in Bristol, and I'd go wandering around over the fields of Ashton Court, which was this lovely kind of country estate near where I lived, cross over the suspension bridge and meander around thinking up magic tricks. Then I'd go out and do them in the sort of few restaurants and cafes and bars that I'd work in, and then people might book me for their parties and so on. And that was a really lovely rhythm. I didn't earn a huge amount of money from it, but I had a cheap student flat that I'd stayed in and didn't really have anything to spend any money on. And that was very lovely. And maybe that is a sort of unless I'm slightly romanticizing it, but that might be a bit of a peak in a way. I mean, the TV stuff brings its own sort of frustrations, and after a while I kind of really needed to move that on and do something else with it. I love doing the stage shows a lot, but so they are in very enjoyable periods, touring as well, but not necessarily cozy. I mean, I suppose cozy is a funny word, but I do enjoy the tour. Then it's difficult if you're in a tour and you've got a partner back home. It's annoying for them that you're off having fun with your friends while they're dealing with all the boring domestic stuff, which is always how it feels, and really hard to avoid that, leaving someone with that feeling. But if I'm excluding the pleasure of touring, I'd probably think right back to the start. I was just in my own little world of dreaming up tricks and then going out and doing them in the evening. That's kind of how I found myself really as a magician. But yeah, that seems a nice memory.
It sounds very sort of cozy, magical. Ooh.
Yeah.
I've always wanted to ask you this actually, but it's just a bit of a weird question to ask just randomly. How do you feel about fame and being recognized and those sorts of things? Do you enjoy it? Do you not enjoy it? I don't actually know.
I think the general experience is that there are nice things that get nicer, and then there are horrible things that get horribler. And that's sort of it. I don't think there's any overall movement one way or the other. So it sort of feels fake. I mean, it's still looking out, so it's still faintly roughly the same. I don't think of myself as like famous. I mean, I've been around people that are. That I remember it was Robbie Williams once. I was in his car and we were going to my flat, and he had to belt it across the pavement so that no one would see him. And I thought, God, you don't want that. Like, that's no fun. So like, yeah, some things get nicer, and you sort of generally feel that people might like you or find you interesting before you've said or done anything. That's nice. That's a nice, obviously not everybody, but that's kind of something that you feel quite a bit. But then equally, you have stalkers and people that just have a whole mad sort of psychotic worldview that includes you at the center of some destructive, difficult fantasy. I mean, that's a very weird thing that you don't have to deal with normally. And you might have your private life or humiliations splattered across the tabloids, which I haven't really had that. But I could do. No reason why that wouldn't happen one day. And also, if anybody cared, and also, just everything might become sort of if you do a show and people don't like it, that might be something that you're going to read in the papers, or controversy. Like, I don't like a lot of attention and controversy. I realize some of the shows I've done have been a bit like that, so I always shy away from that. Sometimes that can leave you feeling a bit sick, even when there's nothing gone wrong, just the fact that there's a lot of opinions if you have a look at your phone. But then you find ways of just avoiding it and taking stuff off your phone and not seeing it. So I think it generally feels like if you want to keep your head down, and a lot of people want a picture out in public, and then that leads to another person, that leads to another person, that leads to another person wanting one. Sometimes that sort of thing can be a little bit frustrating, but then you just try and be nice. In fact, I've become much more careful to be nice, even if I'm feeling in a bit of a rotten mood, that I probably would have been if it wasn't, because that is something we all care about, isn't it? When someone's met someone that's at all well known, what would they like? It's such like the thing you want to know. So I've tried to be more aware of that, and I've also tried to be more aware that you never know what you mean to somebody. I remember when I first met Stephen Fry years and years, like forever ago, before I was doing any TV or anything, and I was just like, I think it was phenomenal. Like, he'd been such a big chunk of my growing up, and he couldn't have been any nicer. He was absolutely lovely. But I sort of imagined when we met, he was going to like say, "Hey, Derren, let's go for a drink," which made no sense. Like, this is before I was doing any TV or anything. But I was bringing so much to it. And afterwards, I was like, God, what was I even thinking? Of course, he wouldn't know me at all from Adam, and why would he give me any time at all? So and that really stuck with me. And I said he couldn't have been any nicer, but nonetheless, just to remember those moments, if you do bump into people, that you might mean a lot to them, and just to try and be present and honor that if that's the case. And it's not always possible, and sometimes people are just a bit rude and those things that don't help, but I try to.
How do you quantify success?
I think I've always had the same criteria for it, which are just whether or not the things in life are just feeling right and interesting and fun and worthwhile and vaguely sort of meaningful or interesting and involving people that are pleasant. I think that's what I was aware of when I first graduated, and I was just starting to do a few magic gigs and sort of earning enough just about to tick by, and I was claiming income support, whatever it's called now, in between. But I was just about getting by. It just felt like that would be the criterion for just things being in the right place and being happy and feeling like, yeah, this is good. I don't think that's ever really changed. And I'd never had any ambition to be on TV or, and when I was on TV, I didn't have any ambition to, I don't know, go and do Broadway or whatever. These are things that sort of came up, but in my mind, I was just doing a thing that I loved and trying to do it as well as possible, and got lucky and the TV took off, and obviously got managers and a manager and people around me that are going to be good at creating a certain amount of machinery and so on. But in my head, it was always very much about, are these things in the moment enjoyable and interesting? So if things are enjoyable and interesting, it feels successful. And I think that I don't really think I think of anything else. It's nice to go out, and it's nice to know my show's sold out at the moment and so on. And that's lovely. And I know that that's a good sign of something, but it's the fact that it's a pleasant experience and it's a nice thing to do. And it feels like a lovely show to give people. And I'm working with people I like. That's actually what makes it feel like it's worth doing, not how many empty seats you can spot.
So not necessarily something you have to strive to, but something you're just...
I think you have to, otherwise you never, I mean, it's an important point, I suppose, because a lot of people do see success as something that's going to be, they're moving towards. But then the point is it just keeps moving further and further away. And that's at any level of success. There's always going to be somebody who's earning more than you, or has been offered a thing that you feel like you should have been offered, or as I had absolutely no interest in doing like a big Vegas show, for example. But if someone I knew that I felt was at my level was offered a big Vegas show, I'm sure part of me would be like, oh, it'd be nice to be offered that myself. I wouldn't want to do it, but you have to really keep a check on that kind of thing, because if you see it as, oh, I should be doing this, should be doing that, then it can be maddening. So I think it's important to keep track of the things that actually bring you a sense of value, and yeah, just to be aware of those. And I really think they hold across any level of income or success. I can only say that for myself because I know that's how I felt at the very start. And then my expectations were also very low. I thought I was just going to be doing magic round tables in restaurants, and then maybe I'd do some lectures for magicians, as that started, as I wrote books for magicians, and that probably is what I'd be doing. But we always compare ourselves to people that are, like, we don't compare ourselves to, I don't know, Madonna. Like, she's weird and mad and super rich. So you make comparisons to people that are just sort of in your own world, don't you? And then you find your sort of petty jealousies and the things that bother you just in that little bit. So that is sort of how we tend to work. And we tend to compare ourselves to other people, and then we at the same time, we're thinking we'll get better, and we'll do this. And then maybe we do move forward and we do achieve certain things. But instead of then comparing ourselves to our past self and going, great, oh, that's really good, I've really moved forward, we just do the same thing, compare ourselves horizontally to all the other people and go, oh, I mean, it's just like it's endless, but it's like that's the wrong thing. It's a mistake. Compare yourself to how you were a few years ago, not what everyone else is doing now. Anyway, but it's important. It's important, especially in our sort of world and careers, I think, to just have a bit of a handle on that. It's easier said than done, and things do sometimes still sting when they shouldn't, but I think it's important.
Derren Brown, that is a lovely answer and a perfect place to finish. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very, very much for having me. Very nice to talk to you.